Hey soccer fans, welcome to the Glass House Soccer channel on YouTube. I'm your host Nick, and today I wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive into the US Open Cup to learn a little bit of its general history, the current format of the tournament, a little bit of the recent controversy with Major League Soccer's participation, and where I think the tournament can go from here. At the end of the show, we'll look at a few records from teams who've won the most cups to individual players who've scored the most goals throughout, and hopefully you can keep the conversation going in the comments section of the video. So with that, let's dive right in. Originally known as the National Challenge Cup, the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup, renamed in 1999, is the country's oldest ongoing national soccer competition. And it was the third longest continuously running soccer tournament in the world, at least up until COVID put a halt in it and they didn't participate in the US Open Cup in 2020 and 2021. Competition was first held during the 1913-1914 season and has been held every year since then, again with the exception of those two COVID years. Now, U.S. Soccer initially administered the competition, but in 1985 they handed it over to the U.S. Adult Soccer Association, USASA, which then returned administration to U.S. Soccer in 1995. The first winners of the tournament, the Brooklyn Field Club, and subsequent winners were awarded the Dewar Cup, donated by Sir Thomas Dewar for the promotion of soccer in the United States back in 1912. It was retired in 1979 due to its poor condition, refurbished, reintroduced in 1997, and was finally awarded to the Chicago Fire in 2006. In 2007, they renamed the trophy the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup Trophy and had a new trophy made, and that's the one that has been handed out since. Couple names here that we've got to recognize. Sir Thomas Dewar, first of all, yes, that is the same Dewar as Dewar's whiskey. So the man has influence in the sporting world and in the drinking world. Also, Sir Thomas Dewar was noted for promoting athletics and sports throughout the UK and Ireland and the United States and Canada, and if you look him up, you'll see that the US Open Cup wasn't the only tournament that he donated trophy to or money to or helped promote himself. He gave a lot of money and attention to different sports throughout the former British Empire, I'll say, if you want to, Canada, UK, and the States, right? But yeah, he did a lot to promote not just soccer, but a lot of different sports and sporting competitions, sporting clubs, and also, had a good drink to go along with it. Now, Lamar Hunt, as many of you know, not just affiliated with American soccer, even though he was one of the founding members of Major League Soccer and best known for managing and owning Dallas Burn, FC Dallas, but also for being one of those owners who really helped shoulder the burden when MLS contracted, when they lost Miami and Tampa Bay. So he's done a lot to save and preserve and promote U.S. soccer, but also huge part of the National Football League. He had founded several AFL clubs prior to the AFL-NFL merger and then was a large part of the NFL after that. So he has since passed away. His children are carrying on his sports legacy, and that is why the trophy has been named for him and why the tournament has been named in his honor. Now, the current format of the tournament is a single elimination tournament. Matchups are based on the team's geography, and when you get into the round of 32 and the round of 16, teams are placed into mini brackets of 4 teams each. It's still based on geography, but each mini bracket will have one MLS team and one seeded USL Championship team. So when the USL enters into the tournament, they have their lower seeded teams or unseeded teams that come in early on, and then the top 8 USL teams will come in at a later part. All right. Over 100 clubs play in the US Open Cup, and even more will participate in qualifying rounds prior to the actual tournament. The champion is awarded $300,000 in prize money and a spot in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, while the runner-up gets $100,000. The furthest advancing team from each lower division league receives $25,000 in extra prize money. Now, I'm not sure when they say lower division where that line is drawn, if it is USL 1, if it is NISA, pick a league, but it's definitely not MLS, and I'm pretty sure it's not USL Championship. So, looking at how teams get in now, there are 3 initial rounds, then you get into the round of 32 and 16, your quarters, your semis, and your finals. So your first round is 63, 64 teams, depending on how there's qualifying that comes in from some of the lower divisions. You'll get 11 local qualifiers, a National Amateur Cup champion, a UPSL Spring champion, 8 National Premier Soccer League teams, 11 USL League 2 teams, 12 USL League 1 teams, 8 NISA teams, and 11 MLS Next Pro teams. So we get those 63, 64 teams. They all play each other, or they play another opponent out of that group, and that whittles it down to 32 teams. Into the second round. Those 32 teams are all paired up with an opponent geographically. They play each other. It's whittled down to 16 teams. And now we're into the third round. Those 16 teams remaining, now we add to the pool 16 teams from the USL Championship. These are the unseeded or the low-seeded USL Championship teams. So we're back up to 32. They all play each other, and we're down to another 16. So 16 teams, we're going to add 8 more USL Championship teams, the top 8, the seeded 8. We're going to add 8 more Major League Soccer teams. We're back to 32 now, but we have our 2 top tiers involved, MLS and USL Championship. So this is the round of 32 now. From there, they are in their mini brackets of 4 with an MLS team and a USL Championship team, 2 other remaining teams geographically based. They play in those mini brackets down to 8 teams in the quarterfinals, and then they are matched up home and away, and we continue to whittle down till we get our champion. All right. Now, when I say matched up or whittled down home and away, matching up like who's playing at home and who's playing away. There's no home and home in the U.S. Open Cup tournament. All right. Now, recent Major League Soccer issues here. This is kind of the biggest controversy to come out of the tournament as of late. So on December 15th of 2023, Major League Soccer announced that their reserve teams from Major League Soccer Next Pro, MLS Next Pro, would be playing instead of the MLS senior teams in the 2024 U.S. Open Cup. So for me, my hometown team, the Chicago Fire, they would not be in it. They would be sending CF2 in their place. U.S. Soccer subsequently denied the request, and that was part of kind of the fun of it as well as the controversy. Major League Soccer came out and put out a statement that said, we are sending our second tier teams. We're sending our MLS Next Pro teams. That's what we're doing. And then U.S. Soccer came out and said, actually, you requested that. You didn't tell us that. We're denying your request in part because we need MLS to participate, and in part because you're obligated as the Tier 1 designated league in the United States to participate in the U.S. Open Cup fully. So that's why your request, not your demand, your request, Major League Soccer, is being denied. So that was an interesting little week in U.S. soccer history where we had like 3 different announcements come out from the league, and U.S. Soccer and finally MLS said, yes, that's right, our request was denied, but we're going to continue to work with them on something. Well, sure enough, a compromise was reached, and on March 1st, 2024, 8 MLS teams were announced to participate with their senior squads, with their first teams, and 11 Major League Soccer organizations would be represented by their MLS Next Pro teams. The way they figured it out, the teams participating in 2024 CONCACAF Champions Cup would not send teams to the Open Cup, except for the Houston Dynamo, who were the reigning Open Cup champions. So to get the 8 MLS participants, they sent Houston and the 7 highest ranked teams from the 2023 regular season standings. Again, who didn't qualify for Champions Cup. Now, DC United was not able to send their MLS Next Pro team because they didn't have one. So DC United was not represented in the 2024 U.S. Open Cup. All right, now let's move on to really get into some of this controversy here. What were the ins and outs of it? There was understandably a lot of controversy, a lot of debate around this issue. And so for time's sake, let me summarize, paraphrase a little bit here. The MLS essentially said that the U.S. Open Cup was not to their standards. There was minimal visibility, poor broadcasting, if any, minimal money as an incentive. The tournament was long and dragged out. It interfered with the regular season. there was schedule congestion, there were all these things. But it all came down to money in the end. Now, the MLS said, look, the prize money isn't worth it. $300,000 is not a lot when designated players are making upwards of 1, 2, 3 million at the minimum, right? And here in Chicago, we've got Kuipers, who's on a $12 million deal, Shaqiri, who's on an $8 million deal. So $300,000 might get you a bench player, a spot starter. It's not a lot in MLS roster terms. The CONCACAF Champions Cup bid is nice. That's a good incentive. But in order to tank your regular season, because that's what it's really going to come down to, if your team is not built enough, and most teams aren't built enough to make a successful MLS regular season run into the playoffs and also have a successful US Open Cup run and also participate in Leagues Cup and also have their players going to, since the quality of MLS is improving, the player pool is going so much more international, have your players play in international tournaments at international levels. There are a number of MLS players who are playing for national teams. And with FIFA expanding the World Cup and the Club World Cup, you're only going to see more of that. So MLS said, for that amount of money, for that amount of stress, it's not worth it for us. And I kind of get it, right? Speaking of money, here's the other little wrinkle that I really think stuck in MLS's craw. There's minimal return in the ticketing, in the concessions, in hosting a game at your stadium, because the US Open Cup imposed a hosting fee. If you were going to have a home game, you would have to pay for it. So a lot of these smaller clubs in the lower divisions, or even in the USL Championship at some level, said, we don't want to host it, we'll waive it, let the MLS club do it and pay the bill. And here's what happened. If you were hosting a first round game, remember all the way back when you're, National Premier Soccer League, USL League 2, if you're hosting that game, you had to pay $1,000 to the US Open Cup in fees. In 2023, in the prior year, it was $750 plus 15% of your revenue over $100,000. Net revenue over $100,000. As you would continue on in the rounds, those fees would just go up. So, for example, when we got down to the round of 16, in 2024, the host team had to pay a fee of 40% of all event net revenue. So you're giving away almost half of everything you're bringing in order to host a US Open Cup game. And what's the carrot that they're dangling at the end? If you're an MLS team, it's the cost of a backup player, spot starter for, or maybe if you're a lower budget MLS team, it's one player's salary for a year or two, right? That's what it is. That's why the incentive was not there for MLS teams. And here, think of it this way. In 2023, if you hosted the final, if you had the championship, the trophy game, if you hosted it, $325,000 fee plus half of all net revenue over $375,000. Now they're just charging you 40% of all net revenue from the round of 16 through the final. So that was a lot of money that clubs are having to give up as a hosting fee. Can you imagine? Your hosting fee was about the prize money. That is not a good way to sustain something here. U.S. Soccer was trying to make money off of these MLS clubs wanting to host it, so MLS said, we don't want to participate. And I can kind of understand it from that dollars and cents standpoint. And I know a lot of fans out there say, well, this is bad for the sport of soccer. You're right, it is. The fact that MLS doesn't want to participate in the US Open Cup. However, it's not MLS's job to grow the sport. It's MLS's job to make their teams the best, to make their league the best. U.S. Soccer needs to grow the sport, and if they want MLS to participate, they're going to have to come to some sort of compromise, and they did, and this is the arrangement that we have. And I'm not trying to come down on one side or other. I'm just saying facts here, and I'm saying what MLS's arguments were. And the U.S. Open Cup really only had the nuclear option of, well, we'll revoke your Tier 1 status, and that would just throw all of U.S. Soccer into disarray. Additionally, U.S. Open Cup only has one qualifying spot for the CONCACAF club competitions, formerly CONCACAF Champions League, now CONCACAF Champions Cup, and we are seeing Major League Soccer start to turn its eyes towards more international exposure and growth. So it's not surprising that they would want to focus their attention on, I don't know, Leagues Cup, where they could potentially get more teams into CONCACAF Champions Cup, or clubs would want to stay focused on the regular season, get into the playoffs. If you get to the semifinals or finals, you're also at a better shot of getting a CONCACAF Champions Cup berth. Now, to be fair, MLS wasn't too far off in the criticism, and I think we've covered that pretty well to this point. It was difficult to find games and watch the broadcasts and get a decent broadcast. There were a lot of the time, it was just dudes on their cell phone, Facebook Living things, and that's how we had to watch it. Recently, there's been some developments, there's been some new TV deals that have helped it a little bit, but it still is so less traditional, it's kind of hard to remember where it's at. In March of 2022, U.S. Soccer announced a partnership with Turner Sports for an 8-year exclusive multimedia rights deal for U.S. men's and women's national team games, and that deal also included the U.S. Open Cup. So early round U.S. Open Cup matches are on the Bleacher Report app and the Bleacher Report Football YouTube channel. So that's how you have to get your early rounds of the Open Cup for now, Bleacher Report. Later ones are also being broadcast, I believe, on Apple TV, as well as other outlets through that Turner Sports deal. Now, the biggest criticism against Major League Soccer is when they say schedule congestion is one of the reasons why we're pulling out. It's just too much on our players. Well, part of the reason for that schedule congestion is the Leagues Cup that they created themselves. And we did talk about all the other valid reasons for schedule congestion, but maybe, MLS needs to really look at themselves. As they say, when you point one finger at someone else, there's 3 more pointing back at you, right? In this case, couldn't be more true. They did create a lot of their schedule congestion, but when they are losing money, as some owners came out and said, in the U.S. Open Cup, why not go try to make it up with this Leagues Cup tournament? Fans of the U.S. Open Cup saw MLS pulling out of the U.S. Open Cup as an attempt to kill the cup and eliminate competition in the business of soccer here. And of course, MLS wants to be the main player, if you will, in American soccer, but they're never going to kill all these other leagues. All they can do is just try to grow, and I've even heard some pundits say that they're going to grow and just start absorbing USL and kind of merge like the NFL AFL, like the NBA ABA, things of that nature. That's the way, if you really want to become the one source of soccer in this country. You're not going to be able to kill your opponents. You got to absorb them and then take control that way. Interesting thought. We'll see. And we could do an entire episode on whether MLS is actually trying to kill off the USL and the lower divisions. But I think we've said everything we need to about MLS's participation in recent controversy for this episode. This is a U.S. Open Cup focused episode. So where do we go from here? Where does the tournament go from here? Well, that, to me, is up to U.S. Soccer and MLS, and to a certain extent the USL. Now, U.S. Soccer, they need to invest in the infrastructure of the tournament. It's obvious. All of the criticisms that MLS raised about broadcasting and prize money and playing in different fields and all that sort of thing, 100% true. That is valid criticism. Now, they definitely didn't come in with clean hands because of the money aspect of it and the creation of their own schedule congestion by creating the Leagues Cup, that's for sure. But they had those valid points about, I'll call it the infrastructure of the Cup. We've seen the new TV rights deal. We've seen the new streaming work from the U.S. Open Cup. It's getting there, and they're starting to get more exposure as well. Now, MLS also can do their part if they want to return the U.S. Open Cup to its former glory days. And I think that would be great if MLS did make it a better tournament and kept winning it. They have some incentive to do that. But what they need to do, what's within their control, expand their roster rules, allow for higher salaries, allow for deeper benches, because the U.S. Open Cup rules prohibit a certain number of MLS first-teamers from playing in the U.S. Open Cup. They need deeper teams and more players available to play in the U.S. Open Cup so they can avoid some of that congestion and fatigue. Here are some of the U.S. Open Cup roster rules that are specifically addressed towards Major League Soccer rosters. Players on contracts with MLS first teams may play for their club's MLS Next Pro team only in the following circumstances. Again, MLS Next Pro teams are the ones participating, other than the 8 top-seeded MLS teams not in CONCACAF Champions Cup. Okay, so here are the ones. Players on contracts with MLS first teams may play for their club's MLS Next Pro team only in the following circumstances. The loan of at least 90 days must be confirmed to U.S. Open Cup staff and announced by the team and/or league no later than 2 p.m. Central the day prior to the match. So they would have to loan the player down to their MLS Next Pro team for a minimum of 90 days. They're going to miss a lot of first team minutes if that's the case. Player must not make a salary above the MLS First Team League maximum salary budget charge, unadjusted for allocation money, designated player status, or any other roster mechanism. So they've eliminated certain players based on their salary. Players must not be averaging more than 15 minutes per game in MLS First Team League matches up through the match day immediately preceding the Open Cup match. So we're talking bench players and late game subs here. No more than 7 players on loan from an MLS first team to a Next Pro team can be included in an 18-player game day roster for an MLS Next Pro team. In the event of hardship, MLS Next Pro teams may apply to the commissioner to include more than 7 players. So these rules are in part to improve competition, but also in part to protect MLS top-tier talent. Essentially, your DPs aren't going to be playing in the Open Cup. Additionally, the USL has to make this tournament a priority. The owners have to be willing to take on some of the financial burden of hosting and promoting. And maybe US Soccer realizes we should probably give these guys a little bit of a break, especially in some of those later round fees. Now, if all 3 of these organizations put the right amount of emphasis and resources into the tournament, the US Open Cup could be one of the best soccer tournaments, in the world. Imagine, and a lot of people are comparing it, and I like the comparison, imagine the NCAA tournament, but on a pitch, broadcast for the entire world to see. That would be an amazing tournament. I'm not going to hold my breath that U.S. Soccer, MLS, and USL are going to come together, sing Kumbaya around the campfire, and get it done, but a man can dream, and that's the fun of sports conversation here. Now, before we go, let's talk about some records by clubs and players in the U.S. Open Cup. Most wins by a club are Bethlehem Steel and Maccabi Los Angeles. They each have won the Cup 5 times. Those are your 2 most winning championship teams, trophy-winning teams here. The Chicago Fire, Fall River FC, Greek American AA, Philadelphia Ukrainians, Seattle Sounders FC, and Sporting Kansas City have all won the U.S. Open Cup 4 times. There's a little asterisk on Fall River FC. They've won it 4 times, and then they won it another 1, maybe 2 times after they changed cities. So officially, it's only 4 championships for Fall River FC in their hometown and 1 or 2 in their new town, but it was kind of the same club. So that's one of those sports debates that you guys get to have at the bar or wherever you're at talking U.S. Open Cup trivia. DC United, New York Pan Cyprian Freedoms, Styx, Bayer, and Fuller FC have all won it 3 times, and there are a number of teams who have won it just twice. Brooklyn Hispano, Brooklyn Italians, Elizabeth SC, FC Dallas, Greek American AC, Harmarville Hurricanes, Houston Dynamo, LA Galaxy, Los Angeles Kickers, New York Americans, St. Louis Cutis, St. Louis Simpkins Ford, and Chicago Sparta. Interesting about our top winning teams here, Bethlehem Steel won all 5 of theirs between 1915 and 1926. Maccabi Los Angeles won all 5 of their titles between 1973 and 1981. And Greek American AA, 4-time winner, is the only club to have won the U.S. Open Cup 3 times in a row. There have been a handful of clubs who have won them back-to-back, but it's only Greek American AA who've done the three-peat. Now, since Major League Soccer founded, they've dominated the competition. They began playing U.S. Open Cup in '96 when the league was founded, and since then, no lower division team has won the Open Cup except for the Rochester Rhinos in 1999, where they pretty much embarrassed the Colorado Rapids in that final. The most recent lower division teams to reach the final, Sacramento Republic in 2022, losing to Orlando City, and Charleston Battery made a run to the final in 2008, losing to DC. And though there's no pro-rel, promotion relegation in American soccer, USL clubs kind of have used this to help make their sales pitch to join MLS. Couple examples: Seattle Sounders made it to the semifinals of the Open Cup in 2007, 2008, and joined MLS in 2009. And FC Cincinnati made it to the semis in 2017, into the fourth round in 2018, and joined MLS in 2019. So these kind of cup runs helped convince MLS that these clubs might be ready to make the jump up into their league. Let's look at some scores. Let's get a little more trivia here, right? Top scorers, career. Most goals in a career in the U.S. Open Cup. Sebastian Letou. And I had to look this guy up because I'm like, I think I remember that name from days of MLS gone by. But Sebastian Letou had 16 goals in his U.S. Open Cup career. In his professional career, he played for 7 different MLS teams from 2009 to 2017. I think he's most well known for being with the Philly Union towards the end of his career. But in that course of time, in those 7 MLS teams, in the course of 18, 19 seasons, he had 16 U.S. Open Cup goals. Now, he played for other teams around the world, around the country, but that's when he got his U.S. Open Cup run. Now, we have 4 other players who are tied with 13 goals. Kenny Cooper, Jaime Moreno, David Bulow, and Johnny Minyanger. Again, 4 players, 13 goals in their career. Kenny Cooper, similar to Letou, played on 6 different MLS teams from 2006 to 2015, with a spell over at 1860 Munich in there. Jaime Moreno, probably the biggest name on this list, 1996 to 2010, he was with DC United. He did have a single season with the Metro Stars in there and had a brief loan to Middlesbrough while he was in there, but he is a DC United legend. David Bulow never played in MLS, but made his name with the Richmond Kickers. He played in a couple other lower division clubs around the United States. I think I remember even reading that he played in some like Northern Ireland club as well for a year or two. So never made it in MLS, but all those seasons with Richmond Kickers, he did work in the U.S. Open Cup. And Johnny Minyanger spent his first 10 seasons as a professional with the Minnesota Thunder and the Rochester Rhinos before playing overseas internationally and not in any top league. He's from Liberia. If I remember, I think he ended up playing, I want to say in an Asian country for a couple seasons and then kind of bounced around a little bit. So those are your top scorers in U.S. Open Cup history. But who are the top scorers in a single tournament? A couple names we've already talked about. David Bulow of the Richmond Kickers had 6 goals in the 2011 edition of the tournament. Kenny Cooper, when he was playing with the Sounders, had 6 goals in the 2014 edition. Mauro Manotas of the Houston Dynamo bagged 6 goals in the 2018 U.S. Open Cup. And Darwin Quintero, when he was still with Minnesota United, 6 goals in the 2019 U.S. Open Cup. So this U.S. Open Cup, up until MLS started, has been dominated by small clubs, had been built upon by a lot of these ethnic teams, corporate sponsored teams, and the MLS, I thought, was going to take it, make it a tournament to be watched, just like teams go around and watch Copa del Rey, watch the FA Cup, all these other tournaments, but hopefully they can rebuild it, work with US Soccer, work with USL, and rebuild this tournament to the glory that it once was. Now, if it's not going to happen, I'm going to try not to let nostalgia form my opinions, but at the same time, having this kind of tournament elevates soccer as a whole in this country, and I think it can help MLS, not only with talent evaluation, pushing them to improve their roster rules, expand their own academies, scouting, coaching, tournament style play that they can use then to use that experience to help them in continental play or in the Club World Cup. We're going to see a couple MLS teams coming up. So I think if everyone invests in the U.S. Open Cup, it can only help. Could other investments help organizations more? Possibly. MLS is banking on Leagues Cup to do that. But I think that the future development of soccer in the United States, if it is going to develop anymore, it needs to have a strong Open Cup. Well, we're going to wrap with that final thought. I appreciate you sticking with me throughout this video. Hope you learned something. Be sure to support the U.S. Open Cup. Go to the local matches, watch the broadcast, help grow the game, help grow the tournament. And while you're at it, make sure you follow the channel here on YouTube, share the video. Also tune into the Feed the Fire podcast for more MLS and American soccer content. Thank you all for listening.